Hey everybody, Miguel here. Today I want to go over another topic that I get asked a lot. Let's say that you have developed an API proxy in Apigee. It works great, no problems. You can make calls to it. However, the URL where the proxy is deployed to, it's an Apigee address. You can see here it's at apigee.net and the subdomain is your organization name followed by the environment where you have deployed the proxy to. This is not ideal if you're at a large company where you want to keep the company's identity tied to the APIs. So instead of having this, you may want to have something like api.mycompany.com. Today, I want to show you how to accomplish this. I'm going to go over the process of how to configure the DNS settings for your domain. I'm also going to show you how to get a certificate that matches your domain name. Finally, I'm going to show you how to configure the virtual host in Apigee to receive calls at this URL. Let's get started. So for this tutorial, I'm going to be using api.apigeedemo.com. I registered this domain earlier today, and that's what I'm going to be using. I use Google Domains to register the URL. In your case, it's most likely the situation is that the URL or the domain name for your organization, it's managed by a separate team. So you're going to have to communicate with that team to request the necessary changes. I'm going to show you here what those changes are. So let's go over to Google Domains and do those changes. All right, so here we are. I'm going to go into the setting for the Apigee demo domain. And within here, I'm going to go into the DNS settings. So the configuration that we're going to do is that we're going to add a CNAME, and that CNAME is going to be API CNAME. Now, what's the value that we're going to be using for this CNAME? That needs to be the original URL that is hosted at Apigee. Let me go back and grab that. All right, so here's the value itself. So I'm going to copy this and put it over here. Great. So now we have a new CNAME registered under the apigeedemo.com URL. This CNAME normally takes around 10 to 15 minutes to propagate through the DNS servers, so you may not see this take effect immediately. So there are a few approaches that you can take to verify whether the CNAME has propagated or not. In general, the idea is that you want to do a DNS lookup on that CNAME and see what response it comes back. For that, you can use your command line, and in Linux, there's a tool called Dns Lookup that you can use, or you can just go online and search for Cname Lookup, and there's tools online that can do that. So let's do both of them. So I'm gonna search for Cname Lookup. And here, this is a very popular one. So let's try this one. And the CNAME is api.apigeedemo.com. And great. So we got a result back. We can see that here's the CNAME and it got a result. And this is the result I was expecting. So looks like it has propagated at least to the name servers used by this website. Let me also show you how to do this same thing from the command line. All right, so here in the command line, as I mentioned earlier, the tool is Dns Lookup, and I'm gonna put the CNAME here, api.apigeedemo.com, and we can see that we also got a response back, and it's saying that the CNAME for api.apigeedemo.com points to demo1337-prod.apigee.net, which is also the result that we were expecting. So this looks correct as well. Now let's move on to the next step where I'm going to show you how to get a certificate that works for this domain name. So how do you do this? How do you get a certificate? Well, chances are if you work at a large organization, you would not be able to do this by yourself. There's probably a security team that manages provisioning of this certificate and keys. So you would likely have to work with that team and ask them to get a certificate for the specific domain that you want. For now, I'm going to show you a way that you can do this by yourself, and just so that you have an idea of what the process is like and what's really happening behind the scenes. So how does this whole certificate stuff works? I'm going to try to explain it at a very high level. The general idea is that there's a group of companies out there that are already trusted by your phone and by your computer. These are what's known as certificate authorities. So when you go on your computer to the URL, in this case, let's say https://api.apigdemo.com, your computer is going to look at the certificate. If the certificate was issued by one of these trusted authorities, then your computer knows that it can also trust this URL. Hopefully that made sense. So let's actually do it. Let's get a certificate for this domain name. To do that, I'm going to use a certificate authority called let'sencrypt.org. Let's go there. So this is what's called a free certificate authority, meaning that they will issue a certificate for your domain name free of charge. The catch is that the certificate itself will have a very short expiration time, usually a few months. I think that the reason they're doing this is because this reduces the chances of somebody abusing the certificate. So in order to get a certificate issued by let'sencrypt.org, we have to install a tool called certbot, and they have instructions that you can use depending on what operating system you have. So let's go and follow the Get Started wizard. And we're going to be doing this from the shell, so let's click here. All right. So I'm gonna choose my operating system, which is Mac OS. And down here we have the instructions. So I already have Homebrew installed in my Mac. So I'm just going to run the command to install Let's Encrypt. And there we go, it's installing now. All right, so it's done installing. Now let's take a look at the actual command that was installed and look at the help for this command. Okay, so here's the syntax for the command. It's certbot followed by a subcommand followed by a set of options for the subcommand and then by one or more domain names. In my case, I'm going to be using the cert only command. As you can see here, this one can be used to obtain or renew a certificate, but do not install it. What they mean here by not install it is that certbot is not going to go and try to put the certificate in a location that it can be used by software such as Nginx or Apache. There's a lot of documentation on how to use certbot online and how to automate this process, but I'm just going to be showing you the manual process for using certbot. Okay, so that was a quick intro to certbot. Now let's actually use it. All right, so as I said earlier, we're going to be using a manual process. So for that, we're going to do certbot, cert only. Remember, cert only is the subcommand. Then we're going to be passing the flag called manual. Next, we're going to be passing a flag that's going to tell certbot what process to basically verify that I, Miguel, own the domain name. And that's going to be called the preferred challenges, and I'm going to tell it it's DNS. It's a DNS challenge. We're going to look at that later. Next, I'm going to tell certbot what the domain name is, and the domain name is api.apigdemo.com. All right, so hopefully this should be enough, and let's run it. All right, so certbot is complaining that it doesn't have access to write to this location, and that's expected because it's not running with root permission, so it's not able to create the directory. So I'm just going to give it a different config directory and a different working directory where it has access to write to. So let's do that. All right, so I have created 3 new directories, and I'm gonna tell certbot that these are the locations for those directories. Great. So now certbot is asking me to enter my email address. Awesome. So after I have entered my email address, this is the manual process that Let's Encrypt.org wants to use to verify that I, Miguel, am the owner of the API.apigdemo.com domain name. So first, let's agree to the terms of service. And I'm gonna say yes to this. I'm also okay with my IP address being logged. Great, so here it is. This is the process by which certbot is going to verify that I, Miguel, I am the owner of the API.apigdemo.domain name. So remember earlier when I said, when I was running the command where I passed the preferred challenges DNS, this is what a DNS challenge is. A DNS challenge is nothing more than certbots telling us, hey, go to your domain's DNS settings and create a Dns Text Record with this name and this value. So what this means is that only an administrator would have access to do this. Somebody else who's not an administrator for this domain couldn't do this. So that means that if I am able to do this, then I can prove to certbot that I am the owner of this domain name. Anyway, so let's do it. I'm going to copy this and let's go back to the DNS settings for my domain. And let's put this in here. And I don't think we have to enter the whole thing, just the subdomain part. And we're going to add a Dns Text Record. Now for the value for this text record, it's this token right here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And now we put it in here and that's it. We have now added a DNS text record, which is basically we're solving the challenge that certbot gave us. Now remember that DNS doesn't take effect immediately, and it may take, I don't know, a few minutes to an hour for this to propagate properly through the DNS servers. And you can still use the same approach we used earlier, where we verified that the CNAME had been propagated. We can use tools online to check whether the text record has propagated. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to go on Google and search for a Dns Txt Lookup Online. And it's the same tool again. I mean, these guys can do a lot of this stuff. And the record that we're going to be looking for is this So it's going to be this at apigeedemo.com, and let's do a lookup. And it looks like, at least from the point of view of this website, it has already propagated. When you run this, it's up to you. You could wait a little bit more, but I'm just gonna go ahead and assume that it has already propagated. So I can go back now to the command line and tell certbot, yes, go ahead and continue and verify that the record exists. Great. So it looks like it was successful, and we can see here that certbot pretty much said, hey, good job, you got it, certificate is yours, and it tells me where it put the information for the certificate. We can see where it put the certificate chain, and we can also see where it put the private key that goes with this certificate. Okay, so let's see what's inside these files. Let's start with the full chain. So let me copy the path, and I'm just gonna cat the contents. So this is what's called a PEM file, and it's just a text file. So let's see. So we can see here that this PEM file contains two certificates. So the first certificate, this is my certificate. This is the one that says, hey, this person, Miguel, owns the api.apigeedemo.com domain. The next certificate, this is the one that issued the first one. So this is basically the certificate for let'sencrypt.org. Sometimes you may have more than two if you have intermediary certificates, and that's okay. So let's see what's actually inside my certificate. For that, we can run an OpenSSL command to take a look at the contents of it. So it's going to be OpenSSL x509-n, and I'm gonna put the path to the certificate. Now, the command is just gonna pick up the first certificate, so it's just gonna ignore the second one, and I'm gonna tell it that I want to see it in text format. And let's scroll up, and we can see here that it's actually decoded what's inside the certificate, and let's see some of the information here. So the most important part is the issuer. So we can see that this certificate was issued by Let's Encrypt, and you can see the validity for the cert. So it's only valid until May. We can also see the actual subject. This is my domain name. So it's saying, hey, this certificate is meant to be used with api.apigeedemo.com. And finally, there's some other extra information that is used basically for the people who are reading the certificate to digitally verify the validity. All right. Next, let's look at the contents of the private key file. Now, keep in mind, even though I'm going to show it to you here, this file is actually very sensitive. You should not share the contents of the private key with anybody. The certificate itself, that's public information, but the private key, it's very critical that you keep it in a secret or secure location. So I'm just gonna show it to you right here. And you can see it's not that much different than the certificate. It's still just a text file with base64 encoded contents in here. So we're almost done. For the final setup steps, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take the certificate chain as well as the private key, and I'm going to upload it into an Apigee Keystore. Then also within Apigee, I'm going to create a virtual host that uses the new Keystore. Finally, I'm going to go to the proxy that I showed you earlier at the beginning of the video, and I'm going to modify that proxy to use the new virtual host. So let's do that. Let's go over to the Apigee tab, and in here we can go into the admin menu, and under environments we can go into TLS Keystores. So when you are in this page, the first thing you should do is verify that you're in the correct environment. For me, this is good. I'm in the prod environment. And then let's go and create a new keystore. You can give it any name you want. So I'm just going to call it demo. Then within this demo keystore, I'm going to create an alias. So an alias is basically where you put the certificate and the key. So let's go and create a new alias. Again, name doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to call this demo as well. And I'm going to upload a certificate and a key. So for the certificate file, let's go, it's in my home directory under certbot. Remember, this was the location that I created earlier when I ran the certbot tool. And under certbot, you can see that we have a config directory. And under here, it's the full chain. So let's pick that. Then for the key file, similarly, it's under certbot. And within here, we can go to the config directory and we can pick the private key. So now we have both files. So let's save this. Great. So we can see that it was imported successfully. It detected the domain name and the expiration time. We can actually click on it to inspect it, and we can see that it's also detected correctly who the issuer is and some other details for the public key associated with this certificate. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the virtual host. For that, we go back to the admin menu, and in here we click on virtual hosts. So if you're not familiar with what a virtual host is, let me give you a very high level quick overview. So when the Apigee gateway receives a request, it will look at the host name for the request. Then it will look at the list of virtual hosts that match this host name. There should only be one. And in this case, so if there's a request coming in and the host name is demo1337-prod.apigee.net, it will route the request to my organization and to this environment. So what we're going to be doing is basically we're going to be creating a new entry here where we're telling the Apigee gateway, hey, if you receive a request to the host name called api.apigeedemo.com, please route this to the demo1337.org to the prod environment. So hopefully that made some sense. Another way you can think about it is that this is very similar to the concept of virtual hosts within software such as Nginx or Apache. If you're not familiar with those, then just ignore that reference. So let's go ahead and create a virtual host. All right, so for the name, we can give any name we want. It doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to call it demo. Base URL, we can leave that empty. You can read more on the Apigee documentation for when you would need to use that. We are not going to use it now. The next part is the host alias. This needs to be the actual host name for that actually matches the domain name that you specified in your certificate. Remember earlier we uploaded the certificate for api.apigeedemo.com, so that's what we're going to put in here. You can also see that port 443, it's already set in here. You cannot modify this. This just means that this is the secure endpoint. So the request, when they arrive on port 443 with this host name, they will be routed to my Apigee organization to this environment. Next, let's specify the actual keystore. So we're going to use a demo keystore that we created earlier. And within this keystore, we're using also the alias called demo. I'm not going to specify this other stuff down here. This is for two-way TLS. You can also read more on the Apigee documentation to how to do two-way TLS. So let's go ahead and create this. Next, let's go back to the original proxy we looked at the beginning of the video and modify the proxy to use the new demo virtual host right here that was just created. So let's go into proxies, and within here we can select the hello world proxy right here. And right now you can see that if I expand this, this proxy is listening on the other two virtual hosts that I had, the secure and the default virtual host. So in order to make this proxy listen on the new demo virtual host, we need to make a slight change in the configuration. So let's go into the develop tab, and within here we can click on the proxy endpoint, click on default, and we're already in here, and you can see that there's a section in here for the HTTP proxy connection settings, and there's two virtual hosts that have been specified. So I'm just going to remove these two and instead specify the one that was just created. So we're going to be using the demo virtual host and remove the other stuff. Oops. Let me fix that. All right, so only one virtual host. So now I'm just going to save this. As soon as I save it, it's going to be redeployed. So let's go ahead and save this. All right, so it looks like it has been saved and it's already deployed to the production org. So if we go back to the overview tab, we should be able to see now that, hey, the proxy is now listening on a different URL, which is this one here, api.apigedemo.com. And we can actually test this. So let's open a new tab. And there we go. And we get a correct result. And we can actually also inspect the certificate. So we can see here, certificate. And yeah, this is a certificate that was issued to us by let'sencrypt.org. Okay, so let's recap. First, at the beginning of the video, we started with an API that was listening on the Apigee out-of-the-box virtual host. Then we went to the DNS settings for a domain that I had already registered, and we added a CNAME for api.apigedemo.com. We pointed the CNAME to the Apigee organization and the correct environment. So you can see it's right here. After that, then we went and used the let'sencrypt.org certbot tool to get a certificate that could be used with the new domain name. Once we had the certificate, we uploaded the certificate to Apigee in a new TLS Keystore. Then we created a virtual host, and finally we modified the proxy in Apigee to use the new virtual host. So you can see here once again that the API now it's using the new virtual host and it's using the new certificate. Well guys, this is the end of the video. I hope you found this useful. If you liked it, make sure to leave a like below. And if you have any questions or comments, also drop them in the comments below or go to the Apigee community. I'll see you in the next video.